Living in 15th century Italy was challenging, especially for a 16-year-old. While the Black Plague was before my time, the effects it had on the entire continent could still be felt. Education was at an all-time low, and few people could even read or write, myself included. The Catholic Church reigned supreme over Europe as a whole, and Rome was certainly no exception. Indeed, Rome was one of the epicenters of the Catholic Empire. Communication was extremely slow and ineffective, thus most of the news I received concerned only Rome itself. Even if some important monarch died or a royal marriage took place, it would take weeks, sometimes even months, for the news to reach me after it happened. Such was the case in the fall of Constantinople in 1453. Constantinople fell on May 29th, but it wasn't until the latter half of June that details of the affair reached Rome, and even then, this news is considered to have traveled rapidly. Rome, after all, was an important city, and we lived in a little town on the outskirts, so we were often the first to receive news in the region. Lacking education and literacy, we resolved to transmit all forms of information orally. This, of course, had its problems, since nobody could ever seem to remember very well, let alone repeat the information to others and so forth. Oftentimes, by the time we got to the fourth or fifth person, we would be talking about the best way to raise cattle instead of how many casualties were suffered in the latest war. At any rate, 16-year-old me, while still young, was able to somewhat grasp the significance of the fall of Constantinople. It meant the fall of an era and the rise of another. I felt that a rapid evolution of mankind in all areas of life, especially on this intellectual level, was coming ever closer. As time went on, the rate of literacy began to tick upward. There were even a few who dared to whisper misgivings regarding the power and authority of the Catholic Church. But amongst all of that, there was a specific point in time, after the fall of Constantinople, that changed the course of man forever. As I plodded down the familiar path I had traveled so much, especially in recent weeks, I thought of how excited I was for my future. Sure, life was difficult, and it could only be taken one day at a time, but having recently gotten an apprenticeship as a stonemason, I couldn't help but look forward to possibly owning my own shop one day and be able to provide not just for myself, but hopefully for a family as well. But as I traveled to my master's shop, my attention was diverted towards two people exiting a pub and conversing in low and excited voices. "Did you get that? The Princess of Austria is getting married to the Duke of Sussex. They made the announcement just a couple of days ago. What do you think that means for Spain and France? How will they respond?" "I'm not sure, but this could change the entire power structure of Europe as we call it. This could mean war for several countries if this does not go smoothly." The men continued their rapid discussion as they rounded the next corner and dropped out of sight. I was momentarily stunned by what they were saying. How could they have known what was or wasn't decided between England and Austria only a few days previously? It made no sense, so I decided to take a detour and enter the pub, and what I saw increased my puzzlement. It seemed as though a meeting had just ended. There were a couple of people talking on a stage of some sort, and there appeared to be a podium. In front of the stage were several tables, and many more people talking in the same excited tone as the two men who had just left the pub. I made my way to the front and asked a man nearby what was going on. He was a short, stocky man with a shock of blonde hair and baby blue eyes. He was clearly not from this area. "Why, we just finished going over the news of the day," he said in an amused and pompous manner. "Since we're getting newspapers almost daily, we gather here in the pub to discover the events that are happening not just locally, but also on the world stage." He smiled at me and gave me a big wink. He spoke with a strong accent. "But how are you getting there? These newspapers, you call them." I was still extremely befuddled. Now it was the man's turn to look incredulous. "Haven't you heard?" His round blue eyes were wide, and he looked like an overgrown schoolboy. "I am William Chesterton of England, and I am here to grow the distribution network for the printing press. Surely you've heard of the printing press. It was released several years ago back in France." "Yes, of course I've heard of that. But what do you mean by distribution network? What's going on?" "All right, son, grab a seat here and I'll explain. You look a little young, but I'm sure a drink won't hurt." He waved to the barman, held up two fingers and pointed them at the table we were sitting. While the crowd gradually thinned, I thought about how excited I was to have a drink. I had only consumed alcohol one time before, and less than a minute later I found myself sipping something that tasted quite different, but also much better. It wasn't as strong and bitter as I had expected it to be. I looked up and was slightly surprised to see William Chesterton looking at me with a knowing smile. "You like it, don't you, lad? It's honey mulled mead from back in England, and everybody likes it. You'd be mental not to." He gave a chuckle of satisfaction as I turned back to my goblet and drank more. "So, tell me about what's been going on," I asked eagerly. "Well, you know how it's been when it comes to events, news, information, the like," he began, taking another swig from his bottle. It's always been a long process of transporting not only news, but also scientific achievements, new books, any kind of information that can be consumed. But things are different now, and blimey, the whole world's going to change here pretty soon. It already is changing, in fact. There's this new invention called the press, the printing press to be exact. It can mass-produce pamphlets, books, you name it. Now information can be mass-produced, and everyone on the continent will benefit. People will know how to read and write. We will be well educated, and it will be easier everywhere to gain knowledge and information on any subject imaginable. It's brilliant. But here's where I come in. Chesterton glanced around quickly, leaned in, and lowered his voice. All of this mass information is great, but right now we have no way to effectively distribute across different countries. After all, we can't have a bloody press in every town throughout Europe. So myself, along with several other men who are like-minded, have been tasked with finding ways to create faster channels of distribution so we can get this information to you as fast as possible. And on top of all of that, it is up to us to find stories worth writing about throughout our travels. When I return to England, I hope to have discovered the best way to distribute this wealth of information, as well as giving wonderful new stories that can be printed. If everything goes well over the next year, I'll never have to work a day in my life again. Chesterton continued to ramble, but I had lost interest. I noticed he had now leaned in so far he was practically on the other side of the table. I found it amusing that while Chesterton seemed to be so nervous about being overheard, he was quite eager to share as much as possible concerning his position to me, a stranger he had never met before. Perhaps it's because I'm so young, I thought to myself. I had always found children had a knack for gaining information that most people had trouble attaining. Yet I also felt that something wasn't right. No, something felt wrong, but I couldn't really put my finger on why I felt that way. Suddenly, my personal musings, along with Chesterton's long, drawn-out story, were interrupted, and we were both brought back into harsh reality. "Hey, we're closed now, so beat it," a voice snapped. I looked up into the face of the barman, wearing an angry scowl. "Pay up and get out," he roared, his finger pointing at the door. "How many times do I have to tell you? Get out! Get out!" I continued to stare at him, but I was unable to move, unable to even respond. "Get out now!" he continued to yell. Everything hazy, I looked over at Chesterton, who had stopped talking and was now standing. But he looked different. The expression he was wearing was disturbing to me, though I could not understand why. Suddenly the barman stopped yelling as I dimly saw Chesterton offer a drink to the barman. What is going on was the only thing running through my head on loop. Dimly, I heard Chesterton saying, "You look thirsty, my dear man. Surely you must have a drink, you're yelling yourself hoarse. Drink up, drink up." Another jovial laugh issued from the mouth of William Chesterton. The barman seemed concerned. "What happened to this young man? He does not look well. I thought he might be drunk, but he is acting strange for a drunk man." "Don't worry about him. He'll be just fine," Chesterton said quickly. "I think you might be going a bit crazy yourself, sir. When was the last time you had something to drink?" But the barman wasn't even paying attention to Chesterton. He was completely focused on the boy in front of him. As he bent down to examine me closer, Chesterton shoved the drink into the hands of the barman, who seemed momentarily surprised to see Chesterton there. "What? Oh, yes, thank you," the barman said distractedly. Taking the goblet from Chesterton, he drank deeply and proceeded to bend down to examine me. The longer the barman continued, the more disoriented he seemed to become, until Chesterton had heaved him off of me and was saying, "Here now, that's all right. Just lay down nice and easy. Sleep it off, you'll be just fine." William Chesterton stood up once again, his smile oddly transforming into a leer, and all at once everything made sense. Then everything went black. William Chesterton stood on the stage inside a small pub on the outskirts of Rome. He had called the town together to give them new and exciting information. The crowd hoped it concerned more news about the tragic deaths of a barman and local boy, as well as the mysterious circumstances surrounding them. Chesterton had just finished reading a letter for the 23rd time, which read, "Sir William Chesterton, due to the unexpected and unfortunate incident that occurred a couple of weeks ago in the local pub just outside of Rome, we have decided to station you in Rome. We send our congratulations, and we commend you for effectively distributing information, as well as discovering intriguing news which will no doubt leave the public wanting more. Business will be extremely lucrative, and you will profit from this immensely. We are sending a printing press to Rome, and you will head operations for the printing and distribution of all news and information in Italy. Congratulations from England. Richard Thomas, head of printing press distribution." Sir William Chesterton looked out over the crowd and informed the local pub that the most exciting news in recent memory was this: Rome now had a printing press.